Did you know that the world's most devastating pandemic might have been kicked off by a simple business dispute? It's like the medieval version of a really, really bad customer review that spirals completely out of control. Before you get too comfortable, go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the channel to encourage me to make more content like this. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights and let's begin tonight's journey. The world you are standing in feels old, yet it hums with a new kind of energy. It is the year 1346, a time not of darkness, but of a dim, flickering light that is beginning to grow brighter. You are in a world woven together by threads of silk and gold, of ambition and faith. Imagine yourself in a bustling port city, perhaps Venice or Genoa, where the air is thick with the scent of salt, foreign spices, and damp wool. The sound is a symphony of 100 languages haggling over prices, of sailors shouting from the riggings of tall ships, and the rhythmic hammering from a nearby blacksmith's forge. This world is more connected than you might think. A merchant in Italy can sip wine from France, sweetened with sugar from the Levant, while wearing a coat made from English wool, dyed with pigments from India. The famous Silk Road is not just a line on a map. It is the planet's central nervous system, a sprawling network of roads and sea lanes pulsing with life. Camels carry treasures across vast deserts, and ships, guided by little more than courage and the stars, brave the open seas. The maps of your time are beautiful works of art, but they are also wildly inaccurate, filled with fantastical beasts in the margins, and continents shaped by guesswork and legend. To sail from one port to another is an act of supreme faith, yet the trade flourishes. This interconnectedness is a source of immense wealth and pride. It is the engine of progress, funding the construction of magnificent cathedrals and the ambitions of powerful city-states. Historians still debate whether these trade routes were a constant superhighway of commerce or a more fragile, seasonal trickle of goods. Regardless, they were effective enough to move not just products, but ideas, innovations, and people across thousands of miles. Life, for many, is looking up. The population of Europe has been booming for centuries. The climate is favorable, and the harvests are generally reliable. The concerns of the day are familiar. They are about land, about titles, about saving enough money for a daughter's dowry or praying for a son's safe return from a petty war. The world feels knowable, its dangers understood. There are famines, wars, and fires, but these are the old enemies, the ones people have learned to live with, to endure. No one is looking to the east with any special sense of dread. No one is listening for a whisper of something new, something ancient and hungry, stirring in the heart of Asia. The world is holding its breath, completely unaware that it is about to suffocate. The shadow is coming, but for now, the sun is shining. Your perspective shifts now, flying across the map of your mind, leaving the familiar shores of Italy behind. You travel east, over the Adriatic, across the Greek Isles, and through the narrow straits of the Bosphorus, where the great city of Constantinople stands as a gateway between two worlds. You continue over the dark, churning waters of the Black Sea until you reach the Crimean Peninsula. Here, nestled on the coast, is the city of Caffa. It is a jewel of the Republic of Genoa, a vital trading post that acts like a commercial embassy deep in foreign territory. Think of it as a remote corporate campus, a fortress of commerce surrounded by the vast, sprawling empire of the Mongols, known here as the Golden Horde. For years, the arrangement has been profitable, if a little tense. The Genoese trade for silks, furs, and enslaved people, sending wealth back to their homeland, while the Mongols collect taxes and tolerate the foreign presence. But that delicate balance has been shattered. A brawl, a dispute over trade. The exact cause is lost to angry shouts and drawn steel. Now, the city of Caffa is under siege. Outside the thick stone walls, the army of the Mongol Khan, Johnny Beg, has been encamped for months. Their siege has been relentless, but the walls have held. The defenders are exhausted, their supplies are dwindling, but their spirits are not yet broken. Then, something changes. A strange sickness begins to sweep through the Mongol camp. Soldiers collapse, their bodies racked with fever and strange dark swellings. The siege falters as the attackers are consumed by an enemy they cannot see. But Johnny Beg, in an act of what can only be described as desperate, malevolent genius, decides that if he cannot take the city, he will give it his plague. The catapults, once used to hurl massive stones, are repurposed. The Mongol soldiers load the catapults with the infected bodies of their own dead. You watch in horror from the city walls as these grotesque projectiles are launched, arcing high into the sky, tumbling over the fortifications to land with a soft, sickening thud in the streets of your city. It is one of the first and most infamous acts of biological warfare in history. The Genoese are horrified, not just by the desecration, but by the stench and the fear. They quickly dispose of the bodies, but it is too late. The invisible enemy is now inside the walls. Soon, the citizens of Caffa begin to show the same signs as the Mongol soldiers: the fever, the agonizing swellings, the swift and certain decline. The city has become a trap. Escape is the only thought. A small fleet of 12 Genoese galleys sits in the harbor, their sails furled, their hulls ready. A frantic scramble begins, merchants and sailors abandoning their worldly goods, desperate to get aboard. They push off from the docks, leaving the dying city behind them, a collective sigh of relief rippling through the crews. They believe they have escaped the nightmare. They believe they are sailing towards safety. Historians still debate how effective the Mongol catapults truly were in transmitting the disease. Some argue the rats were likely already inside Caffa's walls. But it doesn't matter. As the ships slice through the waves of the Black Sea, heading west, they are not escaping the horror. They are carrying it with them. On board, hidden in the cargo holds, nestled in the coils of rope, are rats. And on those rats are fleas. And in those fleas is the bacterium that will bring a continent to its knees. The gentle rocking of the galley is a comfort. The creak of the timber, the rhythmic splash of the oars, the snap of the sail in the wind. These are the sounds of progress, of escape. You feel the sun on your face and the salt spray on your lips. Caffa, with its horrors, is a fading memory behind you. The danger has been outrun. But the true enemy of this voyage is not in the water below, nor is it in the pirates that might lurk behind a rocky cove. The most dangerous passenger on this ship is silent, and it is far too small to see. It is an organism of breathtaking and terrible efficiency, an ancient life form that has perfected the art of survival at the expense of all others. You are sharing this vessel with Yersinia Pestis. To understand the doom you carry, you must first look down into the dark, damp corners of the ship's hold. Here, amongst the sacks of grain and coils of rope, lives the first accomplice, the black rat, Rattus rattus. This is not the robust sewer rat of the modern world, but its smaller, more agile cousin. It is an excellent climber, a creature that lives in the thatched roofs, the walls, and the very structure of human civilization. You think of them as a nuisance, a pest that steals food, but you see them as a constant, unremarkable part of life. They are, in many ways, humanity's oldest and most successful roommates. They go where you go, they eat what you eat, and they thrive in the cities you build. This close relationship is the first critical link in a deadly chain. Now, zoom in closer, into the coarse fur of a sleeping rat. Here you find the second accomplice, the vector, the oriental rat flea, Xenopsilla chiapus. It is a tiny, wingless insect, a marvel of biological engineering designed for one purpose: to find a host and drink its blood. It is a microscopic vampire. But this flea is sick. Inside its tiny digestive tract, the Yersinia pestis bacteria have been multiplying at an explosive rate. They have formed a thick, sticky biofilm, a biological traffic jam that completely blocks the flea's stomach. This is the bacterium's cruel genius. The flea is starving. It feels a desperate, insatiable hunger that can never be relieved. It bites its rat host, drinks the warm blood, but the blockage prevents the blood from reaching its stomach. Frantic and still starving, it pulls away, and in doing so, it vomits the bacterial-laden blood from its previous meal directly back into the bite wound. The flea has become a living, dirty hypodermic needle, injecting its host with a fatal dose of plague. The rat sickens and dies. The flea, its host now cold, becomes desperate. It jumps, seeking the nearest source of warmth and blood. That source is you. It is the sailor swabbing the deck, the merchant checking his ledger, the child sleeping in a makeshift hammock. The flea lands, bites, and regurgitates its poison. The invisible passenger has just disembarked. Historians and scientists still debate if the black rat was the sole animal reservoir, or if other rodents and even human lice played a significant role in its rapid transmission. But on this ship, the deadly trio of bacterium, flea, and rat is performing its fatal dance, a microscopic drama playing out just beneath your feet, sealing the fate of everyone on board and the continent that awaits your arrival. The coast of Sicily appears like a promise on the horizon. After weeks at sea, drifting through a fever dream of death and delirium, the sight of land is a miracle. Messina, a pearl of a city nestled in a crescent-shaped harbor, glows in the warm October sun. For the few sailors still capable of thought, this is salvation. This is the end of the nightmare. They steer their ships, sluggish and unresponsive, toward the port. From the bustling harbor, you watch the familiar silhouettes of Genoese galleys approach. Their arrival is always a cause for excitement, a sign of new goods, fresh news from the east, and money to be made. But something is wrong, terribly wrong. There is no triumphant call from the lookouts, no busy crew securing lines or preparing the gangplank. The ships drift with a ghastly silence, like spectral visitors from a cursed sea. As the first galley bumps clumsily against the dock, the people of Messina crowd forward, their curiosity quickly turning to unease, and then to sheer horror. What they see will be seared into the collective memory of their city forever. The decks are not empty, they are littered with the dead and the dying. The few men who are still on their feet are like specters, stumbling, their movements disjointed. Their faces are masks of confusion and agony, their clothes stained, their eyes hollow. And on their bodies, you see the signs. Strange dark swellings in their necks, their armpits, and their groins, some the size of an egg, others as large as an apple. These grotesque blossoms of death weep and ooze, and the air coming off the ships carries a stench so foul, so alien, that it makes you recoil. It is the smell of sickness and decay, a scent that nature never intended for the living. The dead lie where they fell, on the oars, in the galleys, their bodies already turning dark, a shocking testament to the speed of this unknown affliction. You have just witnessed the moment in October of 1347 that historians mark as the beginning of the end for the old world. These 12 ships are the spark that will ignite the deadliest fire Europe has ever known. The people of Messina are paralyzed by a terror they cannot name. What disease could do this? What curse had these men brought from the sea? It is a scene of pure chaos and dread. One of the more peculiar details passed down through chronicles is how the immense wealth in the ship's holds, the silks and spices worth a fortune, was completely ignored. No one dared touch the cargo, as if the riches themselves were poisoned. The sight of death had rendered wealth utterly meaningless. Historians still debate the exact number of ships that arrived. Some sources say 12, others suggest a smaller flotilla, but the outcome was tragically the same. The people of Messina, faced with a horror they cannot comprehend, will make a decision, a logical, terrified, and utterly fatal decision. They know only one thing for certain: these ships of death cannot be allowed to stay. Panic is a contagion all its own. In the streets of Messina, it spreads faster than any disease. The initial shock gives way to a single, unifying thought: repulsion. The local authorities, spurred by the terrified cries of the citizens, act with a desperate swiftness. You are part of the angry crowd on the docks, your fear twisting into a righteous fury. These ships, these ghost ships, are an abomination. They are a blight upon your harbor, an affront to God and to the living. The order is given, cut them loose, drive them away. It feels like the only sane response, a necessary act of self-preservation. It is the medieval equivalent of slamming the door on a sick visitor. You and the other townspeople, armed with poles and anything else you can find, push the galleys away from the docks. Arrows tipped with fire are shot into their sails, not to sink them, but to scare the spectral crew away, to force them back out to sea. The few surviving sailors on the galleys, delirious and weak, have no strength to resist. Their hope of salvation has turned into a nightmare of rejection. They have sailed across the sea, only to be cast out, condemned to wander the waves until death takes them all. You watch as the death ships, as they are now called, drift slowly out of the harbor, their tattered sails catching the breeze, carrying them away like cursed leaves on the water. A cheer goes up from the crowd. You feel a wave of relief. The danger has been expelled. Messina has been saved. You go back to your home, cross yourself, and pray that the nightmare is truly over. You have just made the single greatest mistake of your life. In driving the ships away, you haven't saved your city. You have doomed the continent. The invisible passengers, the rats and their fleas, did not need an engraved invitation. In the brief time the ships were docked, they had already disembarked. They scurried down the mooring ropes, crept through the chaos on the docks, and melted into the city's alleys and cellars. The plague was already ashore. Within days, the people of Messina begin to fall ill. The same terrifying symptoms, the same swift decline. The city that had just expelled death from its harbor now finds it blooming in every household. But the greater tragedy is happening out on the water. Those cursed galleys, now crewless maritime lepers, did not sink. They drifted. One found its way to Genoa, the very home it was trying to reach, and was again driven away. But not before the infection could leap ashore. Another drifted down the coast, landing near Marseille in France. Others were carried by currents to Sardinia and Corsica, every port that offered them even a moment's refuge, before recognizing the horror and forcing them away, became a new epicenter of the plague. Historians still debate the precise routes of all 12 ships, but their collective impact is undeniable. Your act of repulsion in Messina, repeated in port after port, became the plague's ultimate distribution system. You didn't contain the fire. You took the burning embers and scattered them all along the coastline of Europe. It was a perfectly logical decision, born of fear, and it was the most catastrophic mistake imaginable. The relief you felt watching the ships drift away was fleeting, a fragile bubble of hope that burst the first time a neighbor collapsed in the market square. The sickness is here, inside the walls, breathing the same air you do. Fear, raw and primal, gives way to a desperate search for answers, for a cure. You turn to the only authority you know, the figures of learning and prestige who are meant to understand the mysteries of the human body. You turn to the physicians. Imagine a doctor's study in the 14th century. It is a dim room, smelling of dried herbs, dusty books, and a faint, almost arrogant scent of intellectual superiority. The physician, dressed in robes that signify his education, peers at you not with compassion, but with academic curiosity. To him, you are not a person, you are a puzzle. His entire understanding of medicine is built on a foundation that is, to you, both elegantly logical and catastrophically wrong. The primary suspect for this plague, he explains, is miasma, or corrupt air. He believes the disease is carried on a foul-smelling wind, a pestilential fog that rises from swamps, decaying matter, or is perhaps sent by an unfavorable alignment of the planets. His first instruction is to combat this bad air with good air. You are told to burn fragrant woods like juniper and ash in your home, to carry pouches of herbs and flowers. The origin of the children's rhyme about a pocket full of posies. You are to keep your windows shut, especially at night, to prevent the miasma from seeping in. It is a war fought with perfume. Then, he explains the inner workings of your body through the theory of the four humors. Your body, he says, is governed by a balance of IV fluids, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health is the perfect equilibrium of these humors. Sickness is a sign that one has become too dominant. The miasma has clearly thrown your humors into a dangerous imbalance. The doctor's job is to restore that balance. This is where the treatments become terrifying. To reduce an excess of hot blood, he prescribes bloodletting, either with a sharp lancet to a vein or by applying leeches to your skin. To purge other bad humors, he will give you powerful laxatives or emetics that leave you weak and dehydrated. Some doctors advocate for lancing the buboes, the dark swellings, believing it will release the poisoned humor. It is a painful procedure that often leads to secondary infections. If you were wealthy, you might be prescribed a potion of crushed pearls or emeralds. For the less fortunate, a popular, if bizarre, remedy involved placing a dried toad on the swellings, believing its skin would draw out the poison. Historians still debate whether medieval physicians were cynical charlatans profiting from fear, or dedicated practitioners doing their best within a flawed and broken system. But as you watch these treatments fail, as you see the bloodletting weaken the sick and the potions do nothing, a terrifying realization dawns on you. The experts are powerless. Their theories are fiction. Their cures are poison. No one is coming to save you. The old knowledge has failed, and in its place, there is only the shadow. The knowledge that no one can save you is a cold, heavy stone in your gut. It is a terrifying freedom, an unmooring from every certainty you once held. Now, you must face the enemy, not in the streets or in the harbor, but inside your own skin. It begins quietly, almost politely. A shiver you cannot shake, even when wrapped in your thickest wool blanket. A headache that hums behind your eyes. A dull pressure that makes the light feel too bright and the sounds of the city too loud. You tell yourself it is just a chill, a touch of fever that will pass with a night's rest. But this is a different kind of fatigue. It is not the satisfying ache of a day's hard labor, but a deep, draining weariness that settles into your bones, as if your very marrow is turning to lead. You are not just tired, you are being dismantled from the inside out. Then comes the fire. A fever rises with astonishing speed, a furnace lit within you that consumes all thought. Your skin feels hot to your own touch, yet you shiver uncontrollably. The world dissolves into a swirling delirium of fragmented memories and feverish nightmares. And in this state of vulnerability, the signature of the plague appears. You feel a new pain, a tender spot in the crease of your thigh, or perhaps under your arm, or on your neck. At first it is a small knot, but it grows with an unnatural speed, swelling into a hard, painful lump. This is the bubo, the notorious, terrifying calling card of the disease. It feels like an alien thing, a hot, angry stone that the body has been forced to grow. To touch it sends a shock of pain through you, and the sight of it, a dark purplish jewel of poison, confirms your deepest fears. You have been marked, but this is only one face of the beast, an even more terrifying, though obscure, variation of the plague forgoes the buboes entirely. In this septicemic form, the bacteria multiply so rapidly in the bloodstream that you are overwhelmed before your lymph nodes can even react. Your skin develops dark patches, as if you were bruising from the inside out, which is where the name the Black Death truly earned its title. Death comes within hours, a swift, dark tide that offers no time for goodbyes. And then there is the pneumonic plague, which settles in the lungs. It brings a racking cough, and with every cough, you spray a fine mist of deadly bacteria into the air, making you dangerously contagious to anyone who shares your room. Historians and epidemiologists still debate whether the pneumonic form was a secondary complication or a primary driver of the pandemic, which could explain its terrifying speed. Your body, once a familiar vessel you commanded, has become a foreign country with bizarre and cruel laws. It is a landscape of pain, of strange swellings and internal fires. The surrender is not a single moment, but a slow, horrifying letting go, as you realize the thing that is killing you is you. The surrender of your body is a private horror, a battle fought and lost within the confines of your own skin. But when you look out your window, when you dare to walk the silent streets, you realize your private battle is a public catastrophe. The scale of it is incomprehensible. It is not a sickness that picks off the weak or the old. It is a wildfire that consumes everything. The strongest man, the purest child, the most pious priest, all fall before it. Your mind, a product of its time, searches for an explanation vast enough to contain such a tragedy. A misaligned planet seems too small a cause. A foul miasma feels too mundane. No, this cannot be an accident of nature. It feels deliberate. It feels personal. This is the judgment of God. This was a world that saw God's hand in everything, from a bountiful harvest to a lame horse. So, for a disaster of this magnitude, the cause had to be a sin of equal magnitude. You and your community turn inward, engaging in a desperate, collective self-examination. What have we done to deserve this? The preachers in their half-empty churches thunder about vanity, about the new fashions with their long, pointed shoes. They rail against greed, usury, and the casual blasphemy that peppers everyday language. Every small, human failing is magnified into a world-ending sin. Prayers become more frantic, offerings more lavish, but the death toll only rises. God, it seems, is not listening. Or perhaps the people conclude their penance is not loud enough. If quiet prayers and private repentance are not working, then the repentance must become a public spectacle, a performance of suffering so extreme that God would be forced to pay attention. This is the moment the Flagellants are born. You hear them before you see them. A low guttural chant echoing through the streets, punctuated by a sound you have never heard before, the rhythmic, wet slap of leather on skin. A procession emerges from the gloom. Hundreds of people, stripped to the waist, marching in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Their faces are hidden by hoods, their eyes fixed on some point beyond this world. In their hands, they carry heavy leather scourges, tipped with sharp pieces of metal. As they chant their mournful hymns, they raise the whips and bring them down upon their own backs with terrifying force. It is a spectacle of mass self-mortification, a desperate attempt to take God's punishment upon themselves to spare the rest of the world. One of their most peculiar rules was the duration of their ritual, which was to last 33.5 days, a day for each year of Christ's earthly life. Historians still debate whether the Flagellant movement was an explosion of genuine piety or a form of social rebellion against a church that had proven utterly powerless. At first, towns welcomed them as holy men, but as they move from city to city, their fervor grows, and the established clergy, especially Pope Clement VI, begins to see them not as saviors, but as a dangerous, heretical cult that threatened the church's monopoly on salvation. You watch them pass, their backs a raw tapestry of their faith, and you feel a mix of awe and terror. They are the embodiment of your world's deepest fear and its most desperate hope. The spectacle of the Flagellants fades, leaving behind only the scent of incense and blood, and an unnerving silence. The plague does not retreat. God remains unmoved. The terrifying thought begins to creep into the collective mind. What if this isn't about sin at all? The logic of divine punishment is beginning to fray, because you see the most devout priests and the most innocent children dying just as quickly as the tavern drunks and the greedy merchants. If God is punishing the world, his aim seems terribly indiscriminate. The fear, having nowhere else to go, begins to curdle into something much uglier: suspicion. It seeks a target, a human face to blame for this superhuman catastrophe, a scapegoat. You start to hear the whispers in the breadlines and at the public wells. They are quiet at first, a venomous murmur beneath the sound of church bells tolling for the dead. The whispers are about the wells. The water, they say, tastes strange. It has been poisoned, and who would do such a thing? The question hangs in the air, pregnant with an old and deep-seated prejudice. The whispers quickly find a name: the Jews. In your world, Jewish communities live apart, often in designated quarters of the city. They are the perennial outsiders, a people with different customs, a different faith, and a different language for their prayers. Their separateness, once a source of suspicion, now becomes proof of their guilt. They keep to themselves, don't they? And you notice, or you think you notice, that fewer of them seem to be dying. The fact that their religious laws often mandated a higher degree of cleanliness, including washing hands, which may have offered some small protection, is twisted into damning evidence. They are not dying because they are the ones causing the death. The whispers grow into accusations, and accusations demand proof. Under horrific torture, community leaders are forced to confess. They describe elaborate conspiracies of poisoning the wells, rivers, and springs to destroy Christendom. The confessions are fantastically detailed, with recipes for the poison involving a grotesque mix of consecrated hosts, the hearts of Christians, spiders, and owls, all ground into a powder. These false testimonies, born of agony, are all the proof the mob needs. The rage is explosive. In cities across Europe, from Strasbourg to Basel, communities that had existed for centuries are wiped out in a matter of days. The violence is brutal, a frenzy of fear and hatred unleashed. Pope Clement VI himself issued 2 papal bulls, or official decrees, declaring the Jews innocent and stating that they were dying from the plague, just like Christians. He threatened the persecutors with excommunication, but in many places his words were ignored. The fire of hatred, once lit, was too powerful for even the Pope to extinguish. Historians still debate the extent to which these persecutions were driven by genuine popular hysteria versus a cynical, calculated move by indebted nobles to erase their financial obligations to Jewish lenders. It was a convenient way to get rid of both a creditor and a scapegoat in one violent act. You watch as the smoke rises from a distant quarter of the city, and you understand that the plague has unleashed more than one kind of sickness upon the world. The search for a human scapegoat offered a release for some, but it did nothing to stop the relentless march of the disease itself. The sickness is still a mystery, a malevolent force without a face. And then, one day, you see him. He is a new figure walking down the eerily empty street, a silhouette that feels both human and profoundly alien. He moves slowly, deliberately, a dark bird of prey in a city of ghosts. This is the plague doctor. His appearance is so bizarre, so unsettling, that you stop and stare, unsure if he is a sign of hope or another omen of doom. He is covered from head to toe. A long, heavy coat, made of waxed leather, hangs to his ankles, designed to be impermeable to the miasma and, more practically, to the bodily fluids of the sick. He wears thick gloves and tall boots, leaving no inch of skin exposed to the corrupted air. But it is his head that transfixes you. He wears a wide-brimmed hat, common for physicians, but his face is obscured by a mask you have never seen before. It extends into a long, hollow beak, at least half a foot long, giving him the terrifying profile of a crow. This is not for theatrical effect. The beak, he would tell you, is a primitive respirator, a personal air filter. It is stuffed with a potent mixture of aromatic herbs and spices, a concoction known as It contains mint, cloves, camphor, and dozens of other pungent ingredients, all designed to purify the foul, plague-ridden air before it can reach his lungs. In one hand, he carries a long wooden cane. He uses it to poke and prod his patients, to direct their family members, and even to take their pulse, all to avoid the fatal act of direct physical contact. His presence is a paradox. On one hand, he represents the very edge of medical science and civic duty. These doctors were often hired by towns and paid a handsome sum to treat the sick, rich and poor alike. Their contracts were dangerous. Their mortality rate was staggeringly high. They were the men who walked into the houses that everyone else fled. However, there is a catch to this iconic image. The full-beaked costume you see is actually more typical of the 17th century, a later innovation. While physicians in the 14th century did take precautions, the famous bird mask became the enduring symbol of the plague across all centuries, a historical inaccuracy that is too powerful to correct in the popular imagination. Historians still debate whether these doctors were brave pioneers, risking their lives for civic duty, or opportunistic quacks who charged exorbitant fees for treatments they knew were useless. They offered a glimmer of official action, a sense that something was being done. But as you watch this strange figure enter a marked house, cane in hand, beak pointed forward, you know that his herbs and his wax coat are just another form of prayer, another fragile shield against an enemy he cannot begin to understand. The appearance of the plague doctor, as strange as it is, marks a shift. It is the moment when the response to the plague moves from pure terror to a kind of grim, organized despair. But the organization is a fragile scaffold erected in the middle of a hurricane. The sheer volume of death is overwhelming the very systems that make a city function. The social contract, that unspoken agreement that we will all follow the rules and do our part, is not just broken, it is dissolving. Imagine your local parish priest. He has spent his life christening your babies, marrying your children, and offering the last rites to your parents. He is the spiritual bedrock of your community. But now, he is faced with dozens, then hundreds of parishioners dying every day. He cannot keep up. Some priests, paragons of courage, work themselves to exhaustion and beyond, moving from house to house until they too collapse. But many others, understandably terrified, refuse to enter the homes of the sick, denying the dying their final comfort. The Church, the ultimate authority on life and death, is visibly failing its flock. The economy grinds to a halt. The fields outside the city walls are ripe with grain, but there is no one to harvest it. The farmers are either dead or too afraid to gather in groups. The workshops are silent, the looms still, the forge is cold. The baker cannot get flour. The butcher cannot get meat. The supply chains that once brought spices from the east are now just conduits of disease. Money begins to lose its meaning. What good is a purse full of silver when there is no bread to buy? What good is inheriting a fortune when you may not live to see the next sunset? You see society begin to stratify in a new way, not between rich and poor, but between the dead and the living. The most essential job in the city is no longer the merchant or the craftsman, but the gravedigger. They are paid enormous sums, often drinking their wages away each night, knowing they are probably next. One of the more morbid occupations to emerge was that of the becamorto, or death picker, who would go door to door, calling out, "Bring out your dead," and haul the bodies away on crude carts. The law breaks down. Wills are written in frantic haste, and often go unexecuted. Property is left abandoned, ripe for looting. But even the looters are often found dead a few days later, surrounded by their ill-gotten gains. In some cities, all pretense of order vanishes. The chronicles of the time speak of a shocking moral collapse, where people gave in to their basest impulses, believing the end of the world was at hand. They indulged in wild parties, abandoned their sick family members, and lived only for the pleasure of the moment. Historians still debate how widespread this moral chaos truly was, or if it was exaggerated by chroniclers to make a theological point about human depravity. But one thing is certain: the world you knew, a world of rules, of social obligations, of predictable tomorrows, has vanished. It has been replaced by a singular, desperate focus on surviving until dawn. Society has not just been wounded by the plague, it has become terminally ill itself. The overwhelming numbers numb the mind. 50,000 dead in Florence, 100,000 in Paris. The figures are so vast they become abstract, just statistics on a blood-soaked ledger. To truly understand the plague's touch, you must turn away from the dying metropolis and travel down a muddy country lane. You are walking toward a small village, a place that does not have a name on most maps. It is a hamlet of a few dozen houses clustered around a small stone church and a single well. It is a place where everyone knows everyone else's name, their history, their struggles. This is where the loss becomes personal. As you approach, the first thing you notice is the silence. It is a profound and unnatural quiet. There is no distant laughter of children playing, no rhythmic chop of an axe splitting wood, no smoke curling from the chimneys. The fields around the village are overgrown. the wheat standing tall and golden, but it is heavy and drooping, its bounty ready to rot on the stalk. A single cow stands dumbly in a pasture, its udders swollen and painful, for there is no one left to milk it. The village is not empty, it is just still. You push open the door to the first cottage. It swings inward on a single rusty hinge. Inside, the scene is one of frozen, everyday life. A half-eaten loaf of bread sits on the table, a fine layer of dust covering its crust. A child's wooden toy lies on the floor, as if it were dropped only a moment ago. But the air is thick with the scent of decay that you have come to know so well. In the corner, huddled on a straw mattress, are the remains of the family who lived here. You move to the next house, and the next, and each one tells the same story. A story of a life interrupted mid-sentence. You walk to the small church. The door is ajar. Inside, the pews are empty. The altar cloth is askew. The priest lies at the foot of the altar, his final prayer unheard. You are walking through a gallery of ghosts, a testament to a community erased in a matter of weeks. One of the most haunting archaeological discoveries related to this era is the existence of plague pits, massive communal graves where hundreds of bodies were interred without ceremony. The skeletons are often found tangled together, a silent, bony record of a society so overwhelmed it could no longer even afford its dead the dignity of a proper burial. Some villages, like the famous plague village of Iam in England, though from a later outbreak, made a heroic and conscious decision to seal themselves off, sacrificing themselves to prevent the disease from spreading to their neighbors. Historians still debate the demographic impact on a macro level, questioning whether some regions were hit harder than others due to factors like trade route proximity or even local blood types. As you stand in the center of this silent village, the sheer totality of the loss is crushing. This was a world, a microcosm of love and labor, of feuds and friendships. Now, it is just a memory waiting to be reclaimed by the forest. The plague did not just kill people, it killed places. You leave the silence of the lost village behind, carrying its ghost with you as you return to the coast. You head towards one of the few places in Europe where panic, though present, has not completely extinguished rational thought. You are sailing into the lagoon of the Republic of Venice, La Serenissima, the most serene one. Venice is a city built on water, a powerhouse of trade, whose entire existence depends on the ships that arrive in its harbor. The Venetian authorities saw what happened in Messina and Genoa. They saw how the policy of simple repulsion only spread the disease. They understood that you could not just cast the problem back out to sea, you had to contain it. Their approach was born of a merchant's pragmatism, not medical theory. They treated the plague not as a divine punishment, but as a problem of contamination, like a spoiled cargo that could ruin the rest of the shipment. As a ship approaches Venice, it is not met with flaming arrows, but with an order. It is to proceed to a designated island, a waiting area set apart from the city. Here, the ship and everyone on board must remain in isolation. No one can disembark, and no goods can be unloaded. The crew must wait, and wait, and wait. They must prove they are not sick. The period of isolation they settled on was 40 days. In their language, 40 is They have just invented the quarantino, the system that you will come to know as quarantine. It is one of the single most important public health innovations in human history, born not in a laboratory, but in the panicked mind of a port authority. At first, the system is improvised. Ships are anchored offshore or sent to small, remote islands. But the Venetians, masters of bureaucracy and infrastructure, soon formalize it. They established the world's first dedicated plague hospital, or lazaretto, on the island of Santa Maria di Nazareth, a name that would eventually be corrupted into lazaretto. Here, the sick could be isolated and cared for, away from the healthy population. It was a brutal form of triage, but it was an organized response. The 40-day period itself is a fascinating detail. Historians still debate its origin. It likely had no specific scientific basis, but was instead chosen for its deep symbolic resonance in the Christian world. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights during the Great Flood. Moses spent 40 days on Mount Sinai, and Christ fasted for 40 days in the desert. It was a number associated with trials, purification, and waiting. It was a holy number, and perhaps they hoped it would bring a holy result. A peculiar and little-known fact is that Venice also appointed 3 officials, the Provveditore alla Sanità, as a permanent public health board, giving them immense power to enforce these new laws, even over the powerful merchant guilds. Their pragmatism was not perfect. The plague still found its way into Venice, but it was not the uncontrollable inferno it had been elsewhere. In a world surrendering to chaos, Venice chose order. In an age of prayer, they chose procedure. They looked death in the face and decided to fill out a form. The quarantine and the plague doctor are attempts to control death, to manage it with rules and strange costumes. But death refuses to be managed. It is too big, too intimate, too transformative. The plague has so thoroughly saturated the European consciousness that it begins to bleed into the culture itself. It seeps into the art, the music, and the way people think about their own mortality. You are no longer living in a world where death is a distant, predictable event at the end of a long life. Death is now a constant companion, an unseen guest at every meal, a silent partner in every dance. And so, you learn to dance with it. You walk into a newly painted church, or perhaps open an illuminated manuscript, and you see an image that is both gruesome and strangely democratic. It is the danse macabre, the dance of death. It is a procession, a chain of figures led by skeletal personifications of death. But this is not a dance of the dead. It is a dance of the living being led to their doom. And here is the radical, shocking message of the art. In the chain, you see a pope, his triple tiara askew as a grinning skeleton pulls him by the hand. Next to him is an emperor, his crown and scepter useless. Then a knight in his armor, a wealthy merchant clutching his coin purse, a beautiful lady, a humble farmer, and a tiny baby. All are in the line. All are being led by the same skeletal partner. Death, the art screams, is the ultimate equalizer. Your wealth, your power, your piety, they mean nothing. In the end, everyone takes the same hand. This was a profoundly subversive idea in the rigidly hierarchical world of the 14th century. It was a morbid form of social commentary, a reminder to the powerful that their earthly status was temporary. The art is not just about death, it is about life. It is a desperate call to live righteously, for you do not know when the skeleton will tap you on the shoulder. This theme explodes across Europe. It appears in frescoes, in woodcuts, in poems, and in plays. A lesser known, but equally grim, artistic trend was the development of transient tombs. Before the plague, nobles would have their tombs adorned with a dignified effigy of themselves, looking peaceful and powerful. After the plague, a new fashion emerged, the double-decker tomb. The top level would show the noble in their finery, but the bottom level would show their decomposing corpse, often complete with carved worms and toads. It was a brutally honest memento mori, a reminder to remember you will die. Historians still debate whether the danse macabre was a reflection of pure terror or a form of psychological coping, a way to domesticate death by giving it a familiar, almost carnivalesque form. It is a gallows humor written on a continental scale. By making death a character, a dancer, a partner, you rob it of its alien terror and make it just another part of the human story, the final, inescapable part. The dance of death was a cultural revolution, but the plague was also triggering another, more tangible one. A revolution not of art, but of economics. You are standing in a muddy field that has lain fallow for a year. The lord of the manor, whose family has owned this land for generations, is desperate. Before the plague, he had more peasants than he had land for them to work. Labor was cheap, and serfs were tied to his land by a complex web of feudal obligations they could never escape. They were, in effect, his property. But the plague has ripped that web to shreds. He looks out over his domain and sees a landscape emptied of people. As much as half of his workforce, perhaps more, has vanished. The old system of power has been turned completely upside down. Suddenly, you, the humble peasant, the survivor, have something the Lord desperately needs and cannot find: your labor. You are no longer one of 100 supplicants begging for a scrap of land to farm. You are now a rare and precious commodity. For the first time in your life, you have leverage. The Lord of the Manor comes to you, not with a command, but with a proposal. He needs his fields plowed, his crops harvested. You, knowing your own value, can now negotiate. You demand higher wages, not just a share of the crop, but actual coin. You demand better conditions. You demand an end to the most onerous feudal duties. If the Lord refuses, you can simply walk away. The Lord of the neighboring manor, who is just as desperate, will likely meet your price. The concept of being tied to the land, the very bedrock of feudalism, is evaporating. This shift in power sends shockwaves through the established order. The ruling classes try to fight it. They pass laws, like the English Statute of Labourers in 1351, which attempted to freeze wages at pre-plague levels and forbid peasants from moving to seek better pay. But these laws were almost impossible to enforce. The economic reality was too powerful. You could not legislate away a labor shortage. The newfound power of the peasantry was intoxicating, and it led to a series of massive popular uprisings across Europe, like the Jacquerie in France and the Peasants' Revolt in England. These revolts were brutally suppressed, but they were a symptom of a world that could not go back to the way it was. An obscure but telling detail of this economic shift was the change in diet. With fewer people and more abandoned land, there was a surplus of grain and pasture. This led to a drop in the price of food and a rise in the availability of meat and ale for the common person. For the survivor's life, in some material ways, actually got better. Historians still debate the exact speed and scale of this transition, but they agree on the outcome. The plague did not just kill serfs, it killed serfdom. By clearing the board, the Black Death shattered the rigid, three-tiered structure of the medieval world and laid the economic foundations for a new middle class. A world where a man's worth was not just determined by his birth, but by the value of his work. The serf who survived, in a very real sense, became a king of his own destiny. The new world is a quiet one, a world with more room in it. You are the empowered peasant, the survivor, who can now command a higher wage and a better life. But with this newfound status comes a question that haunts you in the silent hours of the night. Why me? It is the fundamental, unshakable mystery of your new existence. You walk through a town where every other house is empty, its windows like vacant eyes. You work in fields next to men and women who, like you, are ghosts haunting the land of the living. You are a lottery winner in a contest you never wanted to enter. At first, you tell yourself it was the will of God, a sign of your righteousness or a reward for some forgotten act of piety. But you know that is too simple. You saw the devout perish alongside the wicked. The question remains, a splinter in your mind. Why did you survive? As you travel and talk to other survivors, you begin to notice patterns. The plague was not a uniform blanket of death. It was a patchy, inconsistent storm. You hear tales of entire villages nestled deep in remote valleys or protected by impassable mountains that were completely spared, as if they existed in a different reality. And then there are the stories of cities that took brutal, decisive action. The city of Milan, for instance, became a legend of ruthless pragmatism. When the first cases appeared, the authorities did not just isolate the sick. They ordered the houses of the infected to be completely sealed from the outside. The sick, along with their entire healthy families, were walled up inside their own homes, left to die together. It was a horrifyingly effective strategy that saved the city from the worst of the devastation, but at a cost that chills your soul. The mystery deepens when you look at your own family. Why did you live when your brother, who slept in the same room, did not? The puzzle shifts from geography to biology, to something hidden within the blood itself. You, in the 14th century, have no way of knowing the answer, but centuries later, your descendants will find a clue. A fascinating theory in modern genetics revolves around a specific gene mutation, known as CCR5 delta 32. It is a small change in human DNA that, by a strange quirk of fate, makes a person's immune cells resistant to certain types of infection. It is most famous today for providing a high degree of natural immunity to HIV. Scientists discovered that this mutation is unusually common in the descendants of Northern Europeans who survived the plague. The theory is that the Black Death acted as a powerful evolutionary event, dramatically increasing the frequency of this protective gene by killing off those who did not have it. Historians and geneticists still debate how significant this single gene could have been in a catastrophe of this scale. Perhaps it was a combination of factors: your blood type, your diet, or simply the staggering, dumb luck of never being bitten. But as you look at your own hands, you cannot shake the feeling that you are an anomaly, a living puzzle whose solution is written in a language you can never hope to read. The years pass. The initial terrifying wave of the plague, the one you now call the Great Pestilence, eventually recedes. The fires of the funeral pyres die down, and the world takes a shuddering breath. You see life begin to return, cautiously, like green shoots pushing up through scorched earth. People remarry, children are born, and the empty houses slowly begin to fill again. There is a sense of fragile hope, a feeling that the worst is over, that the nightmare has finally ended. You are wrong. The plague is not a single event, a discrete chapter in a history book. It is a chronic illness, a monster that has taken root in the soil of Europe, and it is not done yet. Around the year 1361, a new wave of sickness sweeps across the continent. This time, it seems to disproportionately target the young, the very children who were born in the plague's aftermath. They call it the pestis paurorum, the plague of children. It is a cruel second act, snatching away the generation that was meant to rebuild the world. And then it comes again, and again, and again. Every 10 to 20 years, a new outbreak erupts, somewhere in Europe. Each one is a terrifying echo of the first, a traumatic reminder that the enemy never truly left. It was just sleeping. The plague becomes a permanent feature of the psychological landscape. It shapes the way you think about the future, about having a family, about building anything that is meant to last. This recurrence of the plague created what historians call a culture of fear. People lived with a constant, low-grade dread. Every unexplained fever, every rumor from a neighboring town could signal the monster's return. This had profound and peculiar effects on society. For example, it dramatically changed art patronage. Wealthy merchants, acutely aware of their own mortality, began to invest heavily in religious art, chantries, and memorial masses, not just for the good of their souls, but as a desperate form of spiritual insurance. The repeated outbreaks also perfected the machinery of public health. The quarantine systems pioneered by Venice and other cities became more sophisticated and standardized. A little-known effect of these recurring plagues was on the university system. So many professors and students died that new colleges, like those at Cambridge and Oxford, were founded specifically to train a new generation of clergy and administrators to replace the dead. These new institutions often had more modern curricula, further accelerating the intellectual shifts of the era. Historians still debate the cumulative psychological impact of these recurring waves. Did they create a society that was permanently traumatized and pessimistic? Or did the constant presence of death lead to a more intense appreciation for life, a kind of live-for-the-moment philosophy? What is certain is that the single ship that docked in Messina did not just deliver a single blow. It unleashed a lingering ghost, a shadow that would fall across the continent for the next 400 years, reminding everyone that the world was not as safe as they wanted to believe. For centuries, the identity of the killer seemed certain. It is the bubonic plague, the disease of rats and fleas, the monster with the signature buboes, the story you have lived through, the one of the ships from Caffa, the rats in the hold, the vomiting fleas, becomes the accepted truth, a settled fact of history. The beaked doctor, the donks macabre, the quarantine, all become inseparable from the narrative of Yersinia. But in the quiet halls of modern academia, a new kind of whisper begins. A whisper that asks a deeply unsettling question. What if the story we've been telling is wrong? What if the killer had a different face? You are now in a modern laboratory, surrounded by electron microscopes and DNA sequences. Scientists and historians are re-examining the evidence, and they are finding inconsistencies, nagging details that do not quite fit the classic bubonic plague model. The speed, for instance. The Black Death spread through Europe at a pace that seems almost impossible for a disease primarily dependent on rats. It traveled through parts of wintry Europe where rats and fleas would have been largely dormant. It raced through Iceland, a country with no native rat population at the time. The classic bubonic plague, as we understand it from later outbreaks, simply does not move that fast. The symptoms, too, present a puzzle. While many medieval accounts describe the telltale buboes, many others do not. They speak of a swift, hemorrhagic illness, of coughing up blood, of a darkness spreading across the skin, symptoms that point to the septicemic and pneumonic forms. This has led some researchers to propose a radical new thesis. What if the Black Death was not bubonic plague at all, but a different pathogen? Perhaps a terrifyingly virulent hemorrhagic fever, something more akin to a medieval Ebola. This theory would explain the incredible speed of transmission, as a viral agent could pass directly from person to person without needing the rat-flea-human chain. It would also account for the descriptions of a disease that killed with shocking swiftness. A more obscure but intriguing piece of evidence for this alternative theory is the mortality rate. The Black Death killed somewhere between 30 and 60% of Europe's population. Modern bubonic plague, even before antibiotics, has a high mortality rate, but rarely reaches those apocalyptic levels. This is a fierce and ongoing academic debate. On one side, you have the traditionalists, who point to the recent discovery of Yersinia pestis DNA in the dental pulp of skeletons from 14th century plague pits. For them, this is the smoking gun, definitive proof that the old story is the true story. On the other side, you have the revisionists, who argue that the DNA evidence doesn't rule out the possibility of a co-infection, or that the medieval strain of Yersinia pestis was a genetically different and far more aggressive beast than the one we know today. They suggest that Black Death may have been a plague plus phenomenon, a perfect storm of multiple diseases. The story of the Black Death is not a closed book. It is a cold case that is still very much open, a mystery where the identity of the true killer is still, in some circles, being questioned. Whether it was a familiar bacterium in a terrifying new form, or another killer entirely, the result was the same. A world was scoured clean, leaving behind a void, a silence, and a question. What comes next? You are standing in the middle of this new, emptier world. The air you breathe feels different. The old certainties, the rigid structures of God, King, and Lord have been shaken to their foundations. They did not protect you. The church failed to explain the catastrophe. The nobles failed to maintain order, and the old medical wisdom was revealed as dangerous nonsense. The world, it turns out, was not as it seemed. This profound disillusionment creates a vacuum, and into that vacuum, new ideas begin to rush. The plague did not cause the Renaissance, but it created the conditions for it to flourish. It was like a forest fire that, in its devastation, clears out all the dead undergrowth, allowing sunlight to reach the forest floor and new seeds to sprout. With the power of the old nobility weakened and a new class of merchants and bankers rising on the tide of post-plague economics, there is money and ambition for new kinds of projects. The focus begins to shift. Instead of looking solely upwards towards heaven for answers, people begin to look around them, at the world of humanity. There is a renewed interest in the pre-Christian past, in the art, philosophy, and science of classical Greece and Rome. It is a rebirth, a renaissance of human-centered thought. You see it in the art, which becomes more realistic, more focused on the beauty and complexity of the human form. You see it in the architecture, which turns from the heaven-reaching spires of the Gothic cathedral to the balanced, harmonious proportions of the classical temple. This new spirit of questioning everything also challenges the monolithic authority of the Catholic Church. If the Church was powerless against the plague, and if its earthly representatives were just as vulnerable as everyone else, perhaps its claim to be the sole arbiter of salvation was not so absolute. The seeds of the Protestant Reformation are sown in the fertile ground of this post-plague skepticism. At the same time, the labor-saving innovations spurred by the worker shortage lead to new technologies. One of the most significant, though indirectly, was the printing press. The desire to standardize and spread knowledge, both old and new, created a market for books that simply did not exist before. Historians still debate the direct causality, arguing whether the plague was the primary engine of this change or merely an accelerator of trends already underway. But the correlation is undeniable. The old static hierarchical world died with the millions in the plague pits. In its place, something new and dynamic was being born. It was a world that would eventually lead to modern science, to nation-states, to capitalism, and to a new understanding of what it means to be human. The plague was an apocalypse, but every apocalypse is also a revelation, a violent uncovering of a new truth. The world had to be almost completely destroyed before it could be remade. You stand now at the end of this long journey, looking back across the centuries. Your perspective has shifted. You are no longer on the docks of Messina, no longer in the silent village or the Venetian quarantine. You are here, in your own time, safe and comfortable. But the echo of that history remains. It all comes back to a single image, a starting point for the cascade of consequences you have just witnessed. It comes back to the ships, 12 galleys, maybe fewer, their timbers saturated with the routine of commerce, their holds filled with legitimate goods, their crews thinking of home. They were not an invading army, not a fleet of monsters. They were simply businessmen, sailors, and merchants, caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, trying to escape a local conflict. They were fleeing a horror, but they carried a greater horror within them, tucked away in the blood of their smallest, most insignificant passengers. The journey of those ships is a powerful and terrifying lesson in the law of unintended consequences. The Mongol Khan who launched the infected bodies into Caffa was not trying to destroy Europe. He was trying to win a siege. The people of Messina who drove the ships away were not trying to spread the plague. They were trying to save themselves. Every decision made sense at the time, yet each one contributed to an unimaginable catastrophe. It is a story that shows how interconnected a world can be, and how that interconnectedness is both its greatest strength and its most profound vulnerability. A single spark in a remote corner of the globe can ignite a fire that consumes civilizations. The story of that single ship, and the others that followed, is more than just a grim tale from a distant past. It is a permanent part of our collective DNA, both literally, for the survivors, and culturally. It gave us the quarantine, the beaked doctor, the Danse Macabre. It shattered an old world and cleared the ground for the new one you now inhabit. Every time you hear a debate about public health, about closing borders, about the conflict between individual freedom and collective safety, you are hearing the echo of the choices made on the docks of Messina. The single ship is a timeless metaphor. It reminds us that history is often driven not by grand plans, but by small accidents, by invisible forces, and by the simple, human desire to get home. It is a reminder that the largest events in human history often have the smallest of beginnings, and that sometimes the thing that changes the world forever arrives silently. On a routine voyage, on a ship that just wanted to come into the harbor, the world outside your window is quiet now. The great, churning engine of the day has slowed to a gentle hum, and the darkness has wrapped itself around your home like a soft, familiar blanket. The echoes of the past, of the death ships and the silent villages, begin to fade, their sharp edges softened by the distance of time and the comfort of your own safe space. The story is over, but the piece is just beginning. Feel the weight of your own body, the steady and reliable rhythm of your own breathing, a simple, miraculous machine of life that continues its work without your command. Notice the stillness in the room, the way the shadows lie soft and long on the floor, promising no alarms, no urgency. Let the narrative you have heard dissolve into simple sensations, the feeling of the sheets against your skin, the gentle pressure of the pillow beneath your head, the slow, easy rise and fall of your chest. These are the anchors to the present moment, to this calm and secure harbor where you have finally docked for the night. There are no ghosts here, no ancient fears, only the deep and profound safety of your own bed. The journey is done. The learning is complete. Now, there is only rest. The end. Sweet dreams.